All right, guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are a little late coming on, but we are studying through the Gospel of Mark, and we're in chapter 14. So, just three chapters, but you could say two and a half, as we get into the final week of Jesus. Actually, not even the final week, but we're coming up on the Passover, where he will of course have his Last Supper. Um, there are some interesting things about the Last Supper that I want to talk about. One, if you notice from the headlines, is of course he's going to predict that Judas will betray him, as well as all of the disciples will deny him. Now Judas actually will, of course, betray him, and of course that sin is greater. You could say it's greater than um, um, it's greater than um, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay, it's greater than the rest of them denial because um, because well, let's see. All right, it's greater than the other denials because Judas' crime will actually result in his false arrest, Jesus' false arrest, and then ultimate death, burial, and resurrection, which is, of course, God's plan that ultimately brings about salvation for us, salvation for the world. All right, so let's jump in it here, and we're going to get into it. And again, of course, we're getting Mark's perspective, and oh, I didn't. All right, so we're getting Mark's perspective, and of course, he focuses on certain aspects that the other gospels do not focus on. All right, but here we go. Verse 14, verse 1 says, "After 2 days, it was the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread." Now, this was, of course, the high yearly Passover festival commemorating when God led them out of Egypt, the very night that God broke slavery off of the Israelites and led them in front of the Egyptians out to freedom. He said the chief priests and the scribes were looking for a treacherous way to arrest and kill him. Now, of course, it had to be treacherous because they could not find any legal way. They could not find a truthful way. But he says not during the festival, they said, or there might be rioting among the people. Never underestimate rioting. We see even today how if a crowd is stirred up, by the way, how in crowds can be easily stirred up to riot. Now, I often say the Pharisees could not afford that. The political landscape in which they lived in, what they enjoyed was that um, they enjoyed their freedom given by Rome, and if they couldn't keep the people in control, they would be in trouble with Rome. Besides the fact that they were uh, jealous of Jesus, angry because he was exposing their sins. Verse 3. While he was in Bethany in the house of Simon, who had a serious skin disease, as he was reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of pure and expensive fragrant oil of nard. Now, before we get on, this person, Simon here, Is this referring to Lazarus, whom of course Jesus loved? He was his actually good friend. Unclear, but then he had a serious skin disease or leprosy. Of course, they were reclining at the table. So it says she broke the jar and poured it on his head, but some were expressing indignation to one another. Now, this is kind of interesting here if you look at the details here, because John tells us who was the most boisterous. It was Judas Iscariot. He says, but notice it says that they were also expressing this, and so other of the disciples were expressing this as well. They were just kind of, for some reason, bothered that this woman was wasting this expensive perfume, this oil, on Jesus. Verse 5 says, for this oil might have been sold for more than 300 denarii, or almost a year's pay, and given to the poor. Now again, in John, he tells us, now what's it? Oh, John begins to tell us, John's gospel tells us that Judas is the one who's who's complaining the most. Okay, now we know some of the others felt that way, but it was Judas who actually said that this oil could have been sold and given to the poor. Now John also makes the commentary. He didn't care for the poor. He was a thief, and he used to steal from the money bag. Which is kind of interesting because, when you think about Jesus and his organization, think about Jesus had 12 apostles that followed him. There were other disciples, but there were 12 that followed him, which means they kind of worked for Jesus in this respect. He had to care for them, take care of them. So there had to be money generated. We also know that there were people who supported Jesus' ministry. And so, and also keep this in mind. For example, we know at least Peter was married. So there had to be some provisions made for that. But anyway, he says that Judas didn't care about the poor. And then it says, and look at this, and they began to scold her. Okay? So we see this kind of detail added. That it was not Peter, Judas was the most one who spoke. But you see people feeling this way as well. Verse 6, then Jesus said, leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a noble thing for me. You always have the poor with you, and you can do what is good for them whenever you want. But you do not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body in advance for burial. And I assure you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told in memory of her. So we see that, and I believe it was Mary, the one who broke this oil. But notice, so 2,000 years later, we're reading about this incident. Okay, that, as Jesus said, is told in memory of her. You can also notice that Jesus says you always have the poor, and so the what was bad about their perspective, again, Judas didn't care about the poor. Jesus said you can always do anytime you want to do good for them, they're there. So why would you pick this moment? And people are like that. People kind of have those silly, I'm going to say silly emotions, that they will get upset over the silliest thing. He said, then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to hand him over to them. And when they heard this, they were glad and promised to give him silver. And so he started looking for opportunities to betray him. What's interesting about this here, notice the correlation here, that Jesus rebukes Judas in his outburst. He rebukes Judas. One, you didn't care for the poor. Why are you making a big deal out of this woman who's doing this good thing at this moment here? Why does that bother you? So that's the first thing. And then, interesting, right after that, he goes and negotiates the deal to betray Jesus. Now, I'll say this, that Judas was a thief, Judas was greedy, and this is why he betrayed Jesus. There is sort of this kind of wild tale that Judas did this for noble reasons. That what the reason why he really rebelled is that he was trying to incite Jesus to kind of jump into the Messiah role, the action, and start the, you know, him to take his position as the Messiah, as the king. First of all, there is absolutely no absolutely no scripture evidence of that. That's made up. It's just made up. And that's been around for a while, but it's made up. He was greedy. That's why. Verse 12 says, on the first day of unleavened bread, when they would sacrifice the Passover lamb, his disciples asked him, where do you want us to go to prepare the Passover so you may eat it? Now again, this was a big deal. You had people from all around the Roman world that would travel, Jews that would travel. There were Gentiles, but mainly Jews, that they would travel to partake at Jerusalem the Passover. Now they could eat the Passover lamb where they were at if they were unable to travel, but the reason why Jerusalem swelled with people was because this was one of the feasts that they had to appear by the law. Verse 13, so he sent two of his disciples and told them, go into the city, and a man carrying a water jug will meet you. Follow him wherever he enters. Tell the owners of the house, the teacher says, where is the guest room for me to eat the Passover with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make the preparations for us there. So the disciples went out into the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. When the evening came, he arrived with the 12. That means Judas was with them. Now remember, Judas had already went out secretly and negotiated his deal. So right as they're speaking, in his heart, Judas, right now, I'm going to deliver the master. I'm going to deliver the Lord into the hands of the Pharisees. He says, while they were reclining and eating, Jesus said, I assure you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. And of course, the statement here is this fellowship meal. As he's eating the fellowship meal, he says, one of you will betray me. They began to be in distress and to say to him, one by one, surely not I. He said to them, it is one of the 12 who is dipping bread with me in a bowl. For the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. Now, could you imagine? And hopefully we could say this. No, you really shouldn't imagine. You really shouldn't imagine this. This is not something that you should imagine. But here you are sitting with Jesus. And the reason why this becomes so important is because Judas had been traveling with Jesus. He knows Jesus. He heard him. He just as John said in his letter, we ate with him, we talked with him, we fellowshiped with him. Well, Judas was there. He saw the miracles. And yet, as he's eating this, what is in his heart as he's eating this fellowship meal. Already he's betrayed Jesus. He's already cut a deal to make to he's already cut a deal to betray him. So the statement that Jesus makes, the Son of Man will go just as it is written. Now, you have to keep that in context because, yeah, even though Judas betrayed him, this is happening because it was already foreordained by God. And as Jesus would say, now when we get to the Gospel of John, you hear a lot of these statements that I'm making right here. This is the language that Jesus spoke. For example, he said, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down. No one could take him until it was time." The Pharisees tried over and over to take Jesus, but he said, "No, no one." So when Jesus makes this statement, it's going just as it's written. But notice what he says: "Woe to the man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. And it would have been better for this man never to have been born." Now remember, the disciples begin to be distressed and go, "Surely not I." And I don't even think they know the depths of what Jesus was saying, except Judas. Judas knew he's already betrayed him to the Pharisees. He's going to be arrested. And it was kind of interesting that at sometime during this night, he's going to go out and get him. Jesus is going to turn to him and says, "What you do, go do quickly." So notice the, again, very stern, harsh condemnation. It is better if that man had not been born. It is better if that man had not been born. Wow. Now, I'm going to ask the question, could Judas have been saved? Or was it already predestined for Judas to betray Jesus? I'm going to say that it wasn't preordained for Judas, the person, though God obviously knew it was Judas. The Bible tells us Jesus knew from the beginning it was Judas. Okay. But could Judas have repented? Now, this is very hypothetical. Very hypothetical. The answer is yes. But I also think that God had already foreseen that he wasn't going to. And Luke even tells us that Satan enters Judas. He incites Judas. You start with Judas, his own heart. You start with that. You start with his sinfulness, his evilness that was driven by greed. And he knows that he is betraying the Son of Man. He knows that he's betraying the Messiah. He knows he's betraying the Son of God. So keep this in mind. Even though he wasn't like with Peter, James, and John, what they told him. He heard the stories. He knows this is the Son of God, and yet he's betraying him. And when you see that kind of sinfulness in a person's heart, hard to come back from that. You see, he said it would have been better for him not to be born. And I'm going to show you later how that Judas' evil heart, and you start with that. In other words, I'm saying God did not create Judas and then create the kind of betrayal heart just so he could have this happen. But you see the wickedness of men. Just like the Bible prophesies about the beast that is to arise and rule the world. People call him the Antichrist. The person himself, that God did not create him for that. But you do see people who sell themselves to sin. They sell themselves to sin. So now you can't even, so when you see this here, at this moment, having seen all the miracles, at this moment, his damnation is set. You can even say irrevocable. So that's a sad case. I would not want to be Judas. Okay? I would not want to be Judas. Obviously, we're going to pick it up and continue in the next study. But that's interesting. You see kind of the details there. That's interesting. Judas. Wow. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you in the next study.